All right, so looks like people just hop in as they get going. So it's time to get started. Welcome to Under Pressure, Building Student Resilience for Test. Also, welcome to GW. If you have not attended one of these, be prepared. This is going to be a fast and furious 30-minute webinar and professional development. So also, if you could grab your smart devices, as you know, if you've been here before, we like to learn with and from each other, and these are quite interactive. Your smart device can help you scan the QR codes to participate, but in case you're distracting people with your phone or you've got to do it for something else, I'll also be dropping links in the chat box. So you can access learning activities that way. So you guys ready? Okay, so here we go. Scan the QR code using the camera on your phone, or I'm going to drop a link in the chat box. And bear with me, copying and pasting while talking is not my thing. So using either the link or the QR code, we're going to go to a tool called Mentimeter. And within Mentimeter, you're going to answer the question, what does test anxiety look like? Just what you know in general. Maybe you have it, maybe you've seen a student that has it, maybe a family member has it, but what does test anxiety look like? And that's going to create a word cloud. If you've never done a word cloud before, it is going to create words that are start out small, and the more they occur, the bigger those words will get. So using Mentimeter, you are going to answer, what does test anxiety look like? Maybe you have it, maybe you've seen it, maybe a student sees it or has had it. We're also using a strategy called a bell ringer. If you've never done a bell ringer, it's something you do at the beginning of class. It can be a vocab word definition, statement, question, just to get people thinking about your subject before you dive right in. It lets them mentally prepare. Also, if the link's not working, you're more than welcome to just put your answer in the chat box, and you can put as many words as you want to. Right now we have scared, nervous, shifty. Those are all fantastic. There's a whole slew of others that we'll get to. I don't want to steal anybody's thunder in case you're feverishly typing away. If you like Mentimeter and this is a tool you're interested in, it's free for teachers. You can use it for interactivity and collaboration. Just double check with your IT department on availability for you and students. All right, so it looks like no one else is, oh, we got fidgety, unfocused. Those are fantastic, by the way. All right. So you all have noticed some amount of test anxiety in your students, but what exactly is test anxiety? So test anxiety is a type of performance anxiety. So the type you would feel when you're giving a presentation, when you're playing a game, when you're performing a concert, whatever you're doing, that's a performance. And no matter how many times you've done performances, no matter how professional you are, at some point you're going to get performance anxiety. So a little bit is completely and utterly, totally normal. However, according to UNC at Chapel Hill, test anxiety becomes problematic when it prevents you or students from actually taking the exam, or doing your best on an exam, causes you to feel anxious all the time, day and night, disrupts sleep, eating, or causes your anxiety to become really extreme. So some symptoms of test anxiety, as you guys mentioned, the test anxiety is going to be a combination of physical, emotional, behavioral, and cognitive symptoms, just like any general anxiety is. And when I asked you guys to do this word cloud, where you came up with your answers, we said, scared, nervous, unfocused, fidgety, shifty. Those are fantastic. Some other physical symptoms are nauseous, increased heart rate. Sometimes they say they feel like they're going to pass out. Sometimes they're exaggerating because they don't want to take the test. Sometimes they're actually are not. Headaches. And then you get into the emotional side of things where we said nervous. They may feel helpless, disappointed, angry, fearful. And behavior-wise, they may have just racing thoughts. Their brain may go totally blank. They may even procrastinate, or they may just pull one of their, if I fail this test, then I can say I didn't try on it. And that's not necessarily them being angry about it. It's may actually just be a test anxiety trigger. If you look at this image right here, it's a really good image that LSU's School of Nursing created to show kind of what a person with anxiety, test anxiety, is going through when they're taking their tests or right before their tests. They may feel nauseous, they may feel angry, they may have headaches, they may have any of those symptoms listed that we just talked about. They may be feeling them simultaneously, but keep in mind that each of these isn't necessarily apparent at one time, and every person may not even experience them at all. They may occur at different times, and that makes it really tricky for us as educators and in the field of education to help a student with test anxiety, especially since they can vary minute to hour to day from person to person, and it's not a one-size-fits-all scenario. All right, so lastly, what are some causes of test anxiety? I'm sure you guys have all seen these, you've all experienced them. Some causes of test anxiety, according to UNC at Chapel Hill, are fear of failure. So while some amount of fear is actually motivating, it can actually be detrimental and debilitating to self-esteem if it's perpetual. Lack of preparation, poor test history, high pressure. So maybe they need a certain grade to pass the class. Maybe they need a certain grade to graduate. Maybe it's expectations put on them from parents or guardians or just themselves or a coach. Perfectionism. Perfectionism is having extremely high performance expectations for yourself. And research studies have actually shown that students who have those high levels of perfectionism tend to be very self-critical and have high test anxiety and actually do worse on exams because of that. If they have a history of anxiety, depression, trauma, PTSD, learning disabilities like ADHD, dyslexia, dysgraphia, maybe they have unrealistic expectations, whether they put that on themselves or a parent or a guardian, maybe they're real, maybe they're perceived, and low self-esteem or poor study habits and skills. So that's an overview of what we're looking at here. So now that we have some background information on test anxiety, my name is Meredith Llewellyn. I am the instructional design specialist here at Goodheart-Willcox Publisher. I have been a classroom teacher for 14 years in grades 2 through undergraduate. I have been a technology and LMS trainer, PD presenter, and now I'm in instructional design. So that's kind of some background on me and where I come from with this. So because it's important for our learning and engagement to know the goals and our learning behind it and the rationale and what we're going to go over, our learning outcomes for today are: you will explore the nature of test anxiety. You'll be able to identify strategies to build positive mindsets and foster resilience in your students. You will be able to equip students with effective coping strategies and develop a plan to seamlessly integrate them into your current teaching practice, which sounds like a lot. That's why it's a fast and furious 30 minutes. So here we go. We're going to do a quick stop and jot. We're going to think about things and we're going to write them out. So scan the QR code. I'm going to drop a link in the chat box, and we all know this is not my top skill here. So give me a second. Okay. Should work. Okay. And we're going to answer a question on: how do you see students affected by test anxiety in your classroom or a classroom you're a para in, or when you used to teach? How did you see students affected by this? What did you notice? So not just the symptoms of it, but how did it affect them overall? Maybe long-term, short-term. Once again, we're using Mentimeter. When you can either use the QR code or you can click on the link in the chat box, or if neither of those are working for you, you're more than welcome to use the chat box as well. So how do you see students affected by test anxiety in your classroom? So I know when I was a teacher, my middle school students particularly were, the test anxiety was quite prevalent a lot in my middle school students. Elementary school was starting, high school kids was hit or miss. So we have students shut down. They'd ask to be excused. Yep, that's pretty frequent. They may ask to go to the bathroom and not come back. Asking to go to the nurse is pretty typical, maybe the counselor. The physical composure usually was a big sign. Also, if they were finishing the test way later than it should take. Yep. The procrastinating or panicking on every question, your brain goes totally blank. Those are big ones. You may see their grades. They have stellar grades on like homework and in class and participation, and they take a test and it just tanks their grade. That's another way it could affect them. I hope I thunder if you were trying to type out feverishly. So I see a lot of us low assessment performance. Yep, sorry, I stole your thunder. I see that a lot of us see it in similar ways. So now that we've learned some of the background and we've discussed how we see it in our affects them. So let's talk about how we can help them and some strategies that we can use. So one way to help students overcome test anxiety and just really anxiety in general is to help students build positive mindsets. So as educators, particularly at the end of the year, right, we're right there, we're getting so close. At the end of the year, there's not a lot of time for anything. So some simple ways to help students build positive mindsets that you could interact tomorrow are just model positive talking. So when you talk to them, you talk to your class, you talk about with other adults in front of your students, just talk positively. So for example, if there's a test coming up, tell your students, hey, it's going to be challenging, but we've prepared and we can do it. And it's amazing what just the students constantly hearing that positivity does for them. Not only should you model positive mindsets, but you can also encourage students to talk positively in your classroom and to other students. If you're allowing students to panic in class and talk negatively about how the test is going to go, it's going to trigger some of your triggered before. And then lastly, one of the big ones that we had a PD on when I was in teaching was working with students on talking to themselves positively. So talking to themselves in a kind, compassionate way, like they would a friend, which in middle school, they get pretty sassy when you tell them that the first couple of times. So ask them to talk to themselves like they would a friend. And if they talk meanly, they like, hey, well, I talk mean to my friends and it's okay. Then you can always just say, hey, how would I talk to you? Right? Which is hopefully super nicely. So helping students build a positive mindset, you can implement any of those tomorrow, and it really will start to have an immediate effect on your classroom. All right, now I don't want to just talk at you this whole time. So we're going to do another one. Scan the QR code, or I'm going to post, and we're going to answer a question about building positivity and fostering resilience. So give me 1 second to put this in the chat box. Okay, so you can either scan the QR code or you can click the link. And once again, we're going to go to Mentimeter. How do you foster resilience and positive mindset in your classroom with your students? It could be throughout the year, beginning of the year, end of the year. I've had friends who are teachers who send little cute positive note home over the summer. I'm excited to have you in my class, but how do you foster that resilience, build positive mindsets with your students? And if you give me 1 second, I'll click the button that I forgot to click. Got excited. All right. So how do you foster resilience or positive mindsets with your students? And once again, we're using Mentimeter. So this is a tool if you weren't on before, because I had a couple people just jump in. If you have this and you're like, man, this is a cool tool, just make sure you check with your IT department before you bring it into your classroom. Sometimes they have restrictions and firewalls they need to work through. So how do you foster resilience and or positive mindsets with your students? And if you're having trouble with the link or the QR code, you're always more than welcome to put your response in the chat box if you're more comfortable with that. So empowering students and reinforcing confidence in their abilities does wonders. I use the island of competency. That might be the cool I've ever read. This is where you highlight their talents. If little Jimmy is good at tightening screws, then loosen the screws before he shows up that day. That's great. I love that. I encourage them not to give up if they get something incorrect. Perfect. To ask questions the minute they don't understand. Yeah, because some of our students, they have those really low frustrational points and zones of proximal development, and that can be real tough. So that's great to encourage them of that. So it's also great. I love learning with and from you guys and with your peers. So if you see something on here that you like, feel free to take a screenshot or a picture with your phone. And also remember, we're going to be sending out a recording of this. So if that's easier, that's totally fine. But some of these are really great. So now that we shared some really great ways to support your students, so here are some extra ways you can foster resilience with your students that you can put into effect ASAP, right, tomorrow. So first of all, resiliency in students is their ability to withstand or quickly recover from challenging events or stressors. So resilience takes a lot of practice, similar to positive mindsets. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. And it needs to be modeled. Students need to see it a lot and they need to practice it a lot. The practice, the more quickly they can recover from those challenges. And interestingly, the ability to recover quickly from challenges is strongly linked to high rates of success in adults. They have done some studies at a bunch of different institutions and realized that some of the most successful people in the world and our country have that ability to just recover really quickly and are incredibly resilient people. So one of the first things that you need to do to foster student resilience in your classroom is just make connections. And some of those students are really hard to connect with, right? And some of them you just click with right away, but making any amount of connection, even if it's just hi and they actually say hi back, having that connection is really going to start that resilience for them within your classroom. And then the next thing to do is model learning from mistakes. And I know that sometimes you have to plan those, right? You have to plan to make that mistake because as teachers, we make mistakes, but we're so good at on the fly and moving around that people don't always realize we made those mistakes. So even if you have to fake it, letting students see that you're making mistakes makes it easier for them to admit they've made a mistake and work through it with you. Praise responsible risk taking. I put responsible in there because we don't just want to praise all risk taking, right? So for example, if a student all the time and they raise their hand, layer that praise on them, right? And then this one is one that always worked well for me, but it was super hard for me to implement. But using goals for your class and using goal setting and tracking can really help students build that resilience within themselves. Maybe if you're a PE teacher, it's, get to 15 push-ups or, bring my grade from a 70 to an 80, or build a bookshelf, whatever you're teaching in your class. Help students write them so that they can actually achieve them. I've had students who have made some very impressive goals, but they weren't necessarily achievable. And then give them opportunities to track that data. So we've all seen in all of our motivating stuff, right? Milestones along the way will help you lose weight. They'll help you save money. They'll help you X, Y, and Z, DIY your house. They need those milestones along the way to help them. And it's easier to see when you're documenting. Also, this will help students along the way to learn to enjoy the process and stress having fun and not just the end product. I mean, yes, sometimes you need perfection in those end products. I taught microbiology, and that is a perfection class, or people get sick. Same with like some of our tools classes that involve some pretty scary tools. Uh, Honestly, just celebrate that growth and effort with them and give them the opportunities to celebrate with each other and maybe as a class. Those are always fun. And then when students are struggling with test anxiety during their test, there's a bunch of coping mechanisms that you can use. But some of the coping strategies tend to be kind of distracting. So I tried to pick some that wouldn't be necessarily distracting. And I wanted to throw these in because I know we've got finals coming up. We have presentations coming up. We've got end of the year tests. So I figured this might be something you could throw in pretty quickly. So coping strategies just help students relax and calm down or not further escalate if they are experiencing some amount of anxiety or stress. And these are ones any student can do, not just ones with test anxiety. So practice deep breathing in through your nose, out through your mouth, counting back from 10 with their eyes closed, visualizing a calm place with their eyes closed, visualizing yourself getting a good grade or doing a good presentation. If you allow stress balls, having them, use a squeezy stress ball. I always provided the stress balls so that cheating didn't occur. Companies around my area will sometimes just donate those things. And I think I had it on my Amazon wish list for a while. Also, I had Velcro underneath the table so that students who needed that sensory could just rub different Velcro textures. And I just got those strips at Joann's Fabric. Um, I had some rubber, like PT, if you go to physical therapy, they have those rubber bands that you can pull. I put some of those on the chairs for my students who just needed to kick, because fidgeting really does help with our coping. And then tapping fingers. So just doing this and counting can really help students. And that way it doesn't make any noise. And then lastly, while coping skills are great during the actual test, here are some tips and tricks that I've picked up and found really useful in my 14 years in the classroom that can truly help calm students ahead of the test. So first of all, give students the opportunity to take practice tests. It really helps students get used to the wording that you use, the vocabulary you use, and for the unit. And it's structured similar to a test, so they get used to taking tests in your classroom and in that area. And then on practice tests, formative assessments, assignments, etc., the more you can use similar, your tests are mostly open-ended, then your assignments and formative assessments should be mostly open-ended. And the more they can see that, the more they get experience with that. Vocabulary usage and setting up, just the setup of how you set up your tests can help them without showing these and then having it done in your classroom. What you're testing your students on isn't just the the questions. You're actually assessing them on how well they take a test and how well they take it in your room. And that's not really assessing them on. Teach those study skills. I cannot tell you how many students have no idea how to study. Students would come to me in high school and I would just say, hey, can you study? And then it took me a while to realize that I thought they had these skills. And then when I taught the lower grades, I was like, oh boy, I don't have time to teach these. So just remember they're probably lacking and assume they're probably lacking in those study skills. And then on top of that, share those study skills with, if you're teaching a grade that involve those parents, send them an email, include it in a newsletter for your school, for your class, because I've had parents email me and say, thanks so much for doing this. Like, it's been so long since I used study skills. I just forgot how to help them. And it's limited as much of the yelling as possible. Parents sometimes. And then also have teaching skill or test taking skills and strategies that you teach them. Assuming students know how to take tests is going to be a stressor for those kids. Some of the kids are phenomenal at taking tests, and some of our students are not so great at taking tests. So even just saying, like, hey, remember, you should be able to narrow this down to a 50-50 and a multiple choice, or, make sure you look for knots and ands, or just those simple things that we take for granted as teachers, they don't necessarily know. And then also share that with parents if you're at a grade level that does that. And then the last thing, front load that vocab. So there's a lot of research in the education world that has shown that front loading your vocab at the beginning of a unit or a section can really help students understand that material better. It helps students who read at lower grade levels, who experience dyslexia, who speak English as a second language, and really just beneficial to everybody. One way you can do this is a word wall. So if you use GW resources, you can take those PowerPoints, those technical terms, just print them off, throw them up on a wall, and now you've got a word wall that students see the word with the image all the time. Throw in a definition if you want. You can also make your own and just put in the definition and the word real big and then a picture and just post it up around the room. You can use them as task cards. You can use them as stations. You can do assignments with them, but just let students see that vocab as much as possible. Okay, so now I've thrown a lot of things at you. We're going to end with a strategy called How Am I Feeling and What Am I Thinking? It's a reflection strategy. So scan the QR code, and I'm going to put a link in the chat box if you prefer doing that. And give me 1 second. Okay. And if you're getting tired of these, I promise it's the last one. So click on the link or look at the QR code, or if you feel more comfortable, you can put it in the chat box. That's totally fine too. And we're going to talk about a reflection strategy. How am I feeling? What am I thinking? So how do you feel about what you learned today? How are you thinking you can use it? What were you surprised about? Just in general, how are you feeling about the material? And what are you thinking about the reflect on what we learned and how you can implement this tomorrow. We've got, the end of the school year and a lot of tests, a lot of presentations. How can you help your students as quickly as possible with this material? And I don't think anybody hopped on new, but just in case you did, this is Mentimeter. If you like this tool, make sure you check with your IT department to make sure it's available. It's an interactive and collaborative tool. All right, so we have good tips on how to help students overcome their anxiety. Thanks. Try to make it as relatable to you guys so you can hop in tomorrow. Awesome. I feel like a handful of strategies to try out. Great. That's what I was hoping for. You can start them out next year. Some of those positive mindsets are great for the beginning of the year. But even the end of the year, just building up that classroom. All right, and I want to be cognizant of your time, so I am going to move on to the next slide. Feel free to keep putting in there or put your answer in the chat box. All right, it's pretty much time to go. It's a couple minutes left. I know time flies by when you're having fun, you're getting to interact. I get to learn with you guys. Thank you so much for joining me today as we talked about test anxiety and how to build our resilience in our students. So let's do a quick recap. So today we explored anxiety. We identified strategies to build positive mindset and foster resilience. We learned a couple of coping strategies to equip students with, and we reflected and developed a plan on how we could implement it tomorrow, tonight, whenever your next teaching strategy is. The technology was on Mentimeter. And we used a couple of teaching strategies. We used bell ringers, word clouds, stop and jots, and how am I feeling? What am I thinking? A reflection tool. Couple of reminders. If you don't mind scanning the QR code, and I'm going to put my last link in the chat box that does not take you to Mentimeter, it's going to take you to a Google form that is going to evaluate this webinar. At GW, we are all about our feedback, and I truly do actually read through every single one of these, and I utilize them to help me plan what our next, session should be, and if I need to change anything, more interactivity, less interactivity. So I truly do read these, and I'm really grateful for any feedback you can give me. I taught middle school for quite a long time, so I promise I've got thick skin. You will not hurt my feelings. And then don't forget, there is a certificate of attendance for today that I'm going to also drop in the chat box. So this is your certificate for attendance today. It should take you to a Google Doc on a Google Drive that you should be able to reach very easily. And then lastly, I want to remind you that a recording will be sent out within 24 hours of this webinar to the email that you use to register for this event. And don't panic, I'm going to switch the slide, but the QR code will still be there. So if you didn't get a chance to fill out your PD evaluation form yet, you can either scan this QR code or you can click the link in the chat box to the Google form. Also, if you are interested in next week's webinar, it's called Beyond the Grade, Unleashing the Power of Effective Feedback. You can scan the QR code to register now. And I'm going to drop my last link in the chat box for today. And that is to register for next week's webinar if you're interested. Otherwise, we will be sending out a registration link to the email that you registered with later this week, I believe. Once again, thank you again for joining me. It's so wonderful to get to talk to you guys, to meet with you guys, to learn with and from you. It's just so wonderful to interact with teachers. My name is Meredith Llewellyn. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm the instructional design specialist at GW. I hope you have a great rest of your week. I hope your school year is wonderful. I hope you guys end on a really high positive note. Wishing you all the best luck and good vibes and whatever you need to get through the year. So have a great day. Thank you again.